What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I am absolutely honored to introduce you all to ritual abuse, military mind control, and organized abuse survivor, thriver, and whistleblower, loving mother, writer, painter, and graphic artist, daydreamer of publishing her own memoir one day, content creator, nature lover, 12-step fellowship and survivor support group participant, and a courageous warrioress, bringing a light to the darkness that is RAMCOA, Mary Sparrow. Here's a little bit about Mary and what you guys can expect to hear about on today's episode. From the moment of Mary's birth, the world seemed to mark her path with eerie precision. Taken from her mother for weeks in the hospital, Mary entered a home where love and terror intertwined like tangled roots. Her father's sexual abuse began in her earliest years, and her mother's verbal and physical outbursts born of unresolved trauma. By age 4, Mary was pulled into a child sex trafficking network in the New York City area, subjected to ritual abuse, exploitation, pornography, and sophisticated military mind control programming designed to fracture her mind and silence the spirit. Yet even then, a quiet fire burned within her. She carried an inner knowing that refused to be extinguished. Mary moved through more schools and homes than she had fingers to count growing up, and her mother's courageous departure from her father at age 10 and a half ripped the family across the Atlantic to Ireland, back to Chicago, and beyond. That escape ended the trafficking and ritual horrors, but the discard programming left behind was ruthless, programming her towards self-destruction. In her late teens, 20s, and 30s, Mary battled intense PTSD. She nearly fulfilled her abuser's darkest wish, to live and die in their invisible cage of fear. Yet Mary did not break. In her early 40s, incest memories surfaced in gentle fragments while she immersed herself in 12-step recovery. Journaling, intuitive drawing, painting, and nature's embrace became her anchors. Motherhood to her beloved daughter awakened a wellspring of unconditional love, guiding her to build joyful childhood she herself had been denied. 12-step fellowships, with their raw honesty, humor, and community, became her lifeline. Therapy with compassionate professionals and holistic healing unlocked layers of release. Most powerfully, she found her tribe, other ritual abuse and mind control survivors who became her lifeline and family she never had. Today, Mary stands as a beacon of hard-won triumph. She lives with joy that once seemed impossible. She speaks out, not for fame, but for love, for the friends she lost too young to the same traumas, for the truth that sets captives free, for every soul still trapped in fear's cage. Quote, "My abusers wanted me silent and broken," she says. "I choose to roar with light," unquote. Her voice honors the vulnerable, dismantles the darkness of ritual abuse and mind control, and empowers survivors everywhere to reclaim their power. But Mary is so much more than her survival. She's a vibrant, whole woman whose passions paint the world in color. She writes almost daily, dreaming of the book that will one day carry her truth to thousands. Art flows through her fingers in drawings and paintings born of intuition. Music stirs her soul. Nature remains her sacred cathedral. And in 12-step fellowships and survivor support circles, she finds profound connection, giving and receiving the healing power of shared vulnerability. Mary's testimony is not merely one of endurance. It's a statement to every survivor, every silenced voice, every heart that has known darkness. You are not your scars. You are the light that refuses to dim. Through unimaginable betrayal, generational trauma, and engineered torment, Mary has risen, not despite the pain, but because of the unbreakable spirit it revealed. Mary is proof that healing is possible, that advocacy can shatter chains, and that one woman's courage can ignite hope across the world. Mary's not just a survivor, she's a warrior of the heart, a truth teller, a mother of light, and an eternal reminder. Even in the deepest abyss, the human spirit can soar into awe-inspiring freedom. If Mary can transform hell into heaven on earth, imagine what you, yes, you, can do. Her life whispers to us all: rise, speak, heal, live. The light always wins. So, you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, survivor, thriver, and walking miracle, survivor support group advocate, intuitive creative, fierce mama bear, destroyer of lies, passionate purveyor of truth, and a voice for the voiceless, lending her voice to those without one, the only, Mary Sparrow. Mary, it is an honor to have you on today. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Oh, thank you for that beautiful introduction, Emma. I'm in awe of your writing skills. Thank you so much. It was really beautiful.
You're so worthy of it. You know, it's really an honor that we get to hear your testimony and witness you, and then also take in the miracle of you being here, you know, despite all these horrible things that you've went through, and that joy is possible, that hope can be shared with people. And, you know, you've just had such a tremendous impact, including on me, through your public work and advocacy. And I just want to thank you for everything that you're doing, because not only do you shoulder your own story, but you wrap your arms around our whole community, you know, and give them a voice and give them hope and take in with their own trauma, despite having so much of your own that you've been carrying. So thank you for everything that you've done.
Oh, thank you. I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me here.
You're
So,
welcome. Absolutely. And so let's start diving into your testimony. You know, I think the public has this very skewed vision of what typical abuse looks like. You know, we're taught that it lies in a dark alley away from us, and that it's with strangers. That's who we need to be concerned about with children. And although those things do happen, and we do need to be aware of our surroundings and strangers, the biggest form of abuse doesn't happen through strangers and in dark alleyways. It happens in the home of the child, around people that are close to the child. And it's typically not just random. It typically runs in a family until it runs into somebody like you who says, this stops with me. So I thought we'd start by outlining some of your family history, because this didn't just happen to you. This was a long lineage of events that led it to end up happening to you. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about that.
sure. Yeah, it's definitely generational abuse in my family. Both my parents were born and raised in Ireland in the 1930s and 40s. And they're both, born in the 1930s, and Ireland had been brutally oppressed for hundreds of years by the ruling English class, the wealthy ruling English, and the people of Ireland were forced into genocide, really, where a lot of the actions done by the English government was, I believe, intended to destroy the Irish culture, to destroy the Irish people. I think a lot of the wealthy English saw them as subhuman, inferior. The Irish were not allowed to participate in government. They weren't allowed to practice their religion or even speak their native language at times. And they tried to wipe out Gaelic completely. A lot of the Irish were Catholic. And they were even forced into extreme poverty by the absentee English landlords, who first took their land and then forced them to pay rent and taxes that were very unjust and exorbitant. And they mismanaged the Irish potato famine was mismanaged in a way so that the Irish, even though Ireland was producing food, most of it was sent back to England, and the Irish were left to starve to death, or were given tickets to the United States on overcrowded ships and stuff. So it was really hundreds of years of horrible abuse. But the Irish didn't buckle under it. They kept standing up for their basic human rights and their sovereignty, and they kept pushing back, and then being beaten down, but they finally pushed back and won their independence in 1922. And my mother was only born in 1933, so it was a very tumultuous and intense time. And for example, my mother grew up in extreme poverty. She was one of 12 children. They had no electricity when she was growing up. Her father was a farmer. He had his own farm, but 4 of her siblings died in childhood because of disease, and one died of an accident. And my mother was one of the younger of the 12 children, so she really didn't get a lot of physical nurturing and affection. I don't understand how a mother without electricity, without a refrigerator, without a laundry machine, can take care and raise 12 children. That is just unbelievable to me. So yeah, my father was born in 1936, I believe, and his father was a policeman, and I suspect that his father was also a Freemason. And I don't know too much about my father's childhood, but I do know that he went to a Catholic school, and so did my mother, and that the Catholic Church at that time in Ireland was very abusive to children. Beating children in school was condoned and accepted as a form of quote unquote discipline, and then the church was considered so sacred or untouchable that my aunt, my mother's sister, told me that they would be beaten at school by the priests, and if they came home and complained about it at home, they'd be beaten at home for talking badly about the priests. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So there was just, to me, that's like hell for a child to be everywhere you go, to be treated with physical abuse or poverty. And yeah, my mother told me it was everyone had to bring a piece of coal for the fire at school, and the poor kids whose families couldn't have them bring coal had to sit farthest from the fire. So the kids were punished for being cold. I know, it's just, it was very dark times for children. So learning all this has helped me understand and even have some compassion for my parents. You know, actually, it's grown a lot, my compassion for them. So yeah, that was their childhood.
And that is such a good point. You know, I think when people hear stories like what you went through, the initial reaction, which is healthy, is to be angry. You know, how can somebody do this? And people want to grab their pitchforks and automatically go after the abusers. And,
Yeah.
you know, although there are some just pure evil people in the world, we forget that abusers aren't, you know, children aren't born abusive. And especially if they're loved and cared for,
Right.
they turn into really wonderful humans. You know, something happens to a child and a, you know, young adult along the way to turn them into somebody abusive. And so I think it does merit compassion in a lot of these cases to realize how victimized a lot of these abusers were, you know, and even though it doesn't excuse what they did, we have to look at it from both lenses and recognize their victimization, but also have some accountability and want justice for the wrongs that they did, you know, and unfortunately there's kind of a lack of that in the world. But I think it's healthy to have a balance of both of those. And I appreciate you sharing that because it adds a different layer to the stories that a lot of the public doesn't get to hear a lot of times when they just hear of the horrible things that happen. And so talk a little bit about how your parents met. Your father was actually in the military.
Yeah, he immigrated to the United States, landed in New York, I believe. I'm not quite sure, but I believe he went straight into the military when he arrived, and he was in the 101st Airborne Division of the United States Army, which is a paratrooper. And I had a veteran tell me once that the 101st Airborne Division is considered special forces, and it's a highly trained and tested. They do a lot of psychological testing. And he went to basic training in the South somewhere. And but then he left. He was in the armed forces, I'm not sure for how long, but he then left the military and began working in the New York area. And he eventually met his business partner, and they started buying bars, and so he became a bar owner. I think he and his partner ended up owning 3 bars in the New York City area. And that's around that time is when he met my mom. My mom had come to the United States as a nun, actually. She was
Oh, wow.
she became a novice at the age of 14, and the nuns promised her she could go to high school in Paris. And I was thinking about that. That must have been absolute culture shock for her. I mean, growing up like she did, and she literally told me they didn't have shoes in the summer. They only had shoes in the winter. Yeah, because they were so poor. And then she goes from that to this like incredibly wealthy convent in Paris, and then a few years later they brought her to New York. She was training to be a teacher, and she started teaching in New York. And then when she was 27, she was a nun all that time, and when she was 27 years old, she left the convent and she told me she became disillusioned with the spirituality of the church. She said this was the early 1960s, and the church was going through a lot of changes, and she felt the church was losing its spirituality. So she eventually left, and but I do believe, but she also told me she was, while she was a nun, she was, the word she used was, a priest was inappropriate with her when she was a young nun. And she reported it to her mother superior, and it was put back on her that she had done something to attract the priest. And my mother got very sick after that. She got tuberculosis. So there was trauma in the church with my mom as well. And but she got out, and she became a social worker, and that's when she met my dad on the Irish social scene in New York in the 60s. So
wow, that's fascinating how they both weren't native to New York and somehow ended up meeting despite all the other people there that they could have ran into and met. That's pretty fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
So they met. Did they get married soon after that? And how soon after that did they start having kids?
They had a very whirlwind romance. I think my mom was getting older, and I think in her mind, her chances of getting a husband were dwindling. So she kind of They dated briefly, and then my father asked her to marry him, and she said yes. And he lied to her about his age, and he didn't tell her that he'd already been in rehab for drinking. Yeah. And so when they got married, they were married for a year before they had me. I'm the oldest.
Okay.
And my mother told me that during that year, she had figured out my dad was an alcoholic, and she decided to leave him, but then she got pregnant with me. And there was already a lot of turmoil between them. My mother told me my father was coming home late, and he'd often be drunk, and he was a workaholic. He worked 12, 14-hour days at his bars,
Whoa.
and he'd come home and turn off the TV and start verbally abusing my mother.
Oh.
And it got so bad she developed a stutter. So
Interesting.
yeah, so that's kind of the situation I was born into, which I didn't want to come out. I was late. I didn't. My mom, I was overdue, so I kind of knew what I was coming into, I guess. But
Oh, keep me in here a little bit longer.
yeah.
Upon birth, you were actually taken from your mother, which can be very
Yeah,
traumatizing unconsciously to an infant. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I was born in St. Vincent's Hospital, which is a Catholic hospital in Manhattan. And my mother told me, yeah, they told her that she had developed a infection in her uterus, and they needed to take me away for my safety or something. But I shared that once in a recovery group, and a nurse came up to me afterwards, and she said, I've never heard of anyone, baby, being taken away from an infection like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was strange, and they had me for weeks, and my mom told me she and my dad would come and look at me through the glass. I was in the nursery behind glass with all the other babies in the little beds, or whatever they are. But she didn't see me. She got very depressed, and she had to be moved off the maternity ward because the sound of the babies crying was driving her crazy. Yeah, she couldn't be with me for several weeks. And that, to me, now that I've had all my memories, or a lot of memories come back, that's very suspicious to me. Like, I'm wondering, because I know with MK Ultra, a lot of the MK Ultra was, from what I've heard, connected to a lot of different institutions and facilities. And I could very much see that being a connection with St. Vincent's. Yeah, it's a very old and famous Catholic hospital in New York. So.
And it's also so common that for one reason or another, there's always this immediate separation from the infant and the mother, a lot of times in MK Ultra survivor testimonies. And it seems like that's one of their strategies, to immediately traumatize the child and to start breaking bonds between anybody in their life that they could be close to, which is so terrifying, and just so sad to think of you as a little infant, all alone in this like incubator thing away from your mother. And then also your mom, I think postpartum depression, we're sort of like just starting to understand that, but I bet it was so common back then too, and just wasn't really recognized. And hormones, and just that oxytocin, wanting to be with your baby, and I can't even imagine that devastation for weeks to not be able to hold your baby because of a uterine infection. That does sound extremely bizarre to me.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. No,
Oh my
yeah, that's and the doctors also told her not to breastfeed, that they said formula was better. So yeah.
Man.
So to me it's crazy. But yeah.
And so at what age did your abuse start, and who was the catalyst for that?
Well, I think Well, my father started sexually abusing me when I was very young. I'm not sure the exact age, but probably around 2 or 3, maybe even younger. But there was some very intense, I witnessed some intense violence that I think really, like I was in a crib and when I saw my parents fighting in front of my crib and my father hit my mother, which
Oh,
she said only happened once, but he punched her in the face and she hit him back and they were, and I'm witnessing this and it was just like I was about a year and a half because I was going back, I was remembering parts of this and not understanding it. And my mother was alive at the time and she called me once and asked how I was doing. And usually I kept it at that time really superficial with my mom. But for some reason that day I said, well, to tell you the truth, Mom, I'm remembering some really intense abuse when I was really young. I think it was you and Dad fighting. And she said, well, the only time I knew something really affected you, and she went on to describe the scene that I was remembering. Yeah.
oh, no way.
Yes, she said, your father hit me and we were in front of your crib. And she said what happened was she was in shock. And so she left and walked around the block. And to me, it was that as an infant, all I knew is that my mother left me with this very angry man. And I believe he got sick of me screaming and he put his hand over my mouth to silence me and held it there. And he held it long enough to the point where I really thought I didn't know if I could think in terms of death as a kid. I was only a year and a half, but I couldn't breathe. And he let his hand go at the last minute. But it kind of ingrained this deep, deep belief in me that A, I'm worthless, B, I don't deserve love, and 3, intimacy is not allowed. I'm not allowed to express myself because, I'll be literally killed. And yeah, I'll die if I'm intimate. And then my mother was also dealing with her own PTSD from her own childhood. And she told me later, she really believed that she had to hit me as a child in order to raise me well. That if she didn't hit me, I'd turn into a spoiled brat. And that was kind of the belief at that.
Wow.
Yeah, especially in Ireland. That was, I think, a very powerful cultural belief. And so there was just a lot of physical, emotional, and verbal abuse in the family growing up. But at the same time, which is so, to me, this is what makes people so human. My mother could be very loving too. And she would cook and she instilled a deep love of reading in me because she would take us kids to the library every week. And I remember we'd each get to pick out 7 books, stack of books, and when you're a kid, for me, that was a big deal because I got to pick the books I wanted. And she'd read them to us at night. And she even taught me to read early before. I think I was reading simple sentences by the time I went to kindergarten.
Wow.
She'd make little books. She'd cut out pictures from magazines and make little books with words in it and stuff. And my dad was making a lot of money, so we could afford to. We took trips to Ireland and England, and there were times when I remember that my mom, there were parties and there was music, and I loved music as a kid, and I had pets growing up and stuff. So it was a weird mix of trauma with times of love and joy, but there was a lot of tension in the house because my father's drinking was getting worse, and he was getting more and more abusive, basically. And yeah, so it was a really bizarre mix. But I think, like, I remember my mother taking me to Central Park and we going to the children's zoo. And so I think it was moments like that of being in nature. Ireland is incredibly beautiful, the land of Ireland. And just, yeah, I think it helped me survive, those times, the abuse in my childhood.
And I'm glad you talked about that too, because I think also people, when they hear these stories, it's like some of these things are so horrible that are done that people have trouble humanizing the abuser in any way and realizing that these people can also, even if it's fake, they can still be very charming. They can go to work. They can have businesses. They can be good parents at times. They can take their children on a trip and look like a completely normal family, that everything is happy, that the children can experience joy in moments, that it's not just all fear and trauma every single minute of the day.
Right.
There are these glimmers of light and these moments of happiness. And that's what also makes abuse so confusing, especially when you're a child, because that mixture, the child doesn't just hate the parent. There's like this deep yearning for love, and you get moments of it. You get moments of that joy and that love and affection that you need, and adventure and these different things. But then on the other hand, there's so much depravity at the same time happening that it can be such a confusing thing to sort through, especially, as an adult, when you start to put it all together and be like, wait, what was all this? Why was there this mishmash of things and this roller coaster of emotions that I was always on?
That's right. That's right. And even my father had moments of, I think he was deeply shattered. I think my father was sexually and maybe ritually abused from a small child because of his father. And I've always suspected his side of the family were dark occultists, like they practiced some kind of dark occult. There was strange when my parents were newlyweds. He bought a house in Queens, New York, and both his sisters lived with us for when my parents were newlyweds and then when I was born. And my mother told me back then she was like a doormat. She couldn't say no to anything. And she said, but it was always strange to her that these sisters were living with them in this house in Queens, and they were newlyweds, and so it was unusual. And I'm wondering now, because I had one memory where, as a small child in the house, I woke up at night and I saw 3 figures around me. And there was some kind of chanting going on, and I'm wondering if that was connected to my dad's family. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's horrific. And also makes sense how, if he was somehow in some type of a program or in a systemized abuse network growing up in his own family.
Yes.
Your grandfather's connections or whoever it was that was, facilitating that organized abuse on your father, it makes sense that they'd want it to continue on to the next generation. And for you obviously were born at a different time, so it's been more sophisticated since whatever he went through. And so it makes sense how it fell on you, on your own siblings.
Yeah, my dad was also very, very depressed. My mother told me that I was born a girl. I think he really wanted a man, a boy. And that's always intrigued me too. And that strikes me as being some kind of, it could be connected to some kind of ritualistic, genealogy thing or something. I don't know.
Especially since you were the firstborn. If he wanted a son for some reason, it could be significant if he had occult ties.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And so was it his ties through the military that pulled you into the programs that you and your siblings were roped into?
My mom was in a lot of denial about what was going on, especially the sexual abuse, I think, with my dad. She really wanted us to be a good family. And looking good was very important to her. And at the age of 4, my mother later told me my father started taking me to work with him a lot, she said. And growing up, I had very few memories of being with my dad, especially at his bars, which was that was his work. And so it was always kind of like this blank, bizarre space. I had a few memories, of being there, but and when my mother told me this, I could tell she was not happy with it. But she didn't have the strength to say no. She really believed her duty as a good Catholic wife was to obey and support her husband. So, yeah, he was taking me to quote unquote work. And when I was older and the memories started coming back, I realized now that he was taking me to all these different locations. And that's when the mind control, I was being brought to these like military places, or I called them lab-like places, but I would see men in military uniform there or men in white lab coats. And I was also being brought, from that time, I have memories of pedophile groups and ritual abuse groups. And I believe I'm not sure which happened first. I don't know the order of it, but when the memories started coming back, I was getting all different kinds at once. It didn't come back in order, necessarily.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh my gosh, that is so terrifying. Especially if your mom, it sounds like she was extremely vulnerable and became neglectful as a result of her own trauma and kind of like looked away from a lot of things. She just wanted everything to be perfect and she couldn't even deal with her own trauma, much less extra additional trauma happening in the home. And so there was so much neglect on behalf of her being able to keep you safe. And your dad's taking you and he's trafficking you and doing just these horrific things to you. And your mom is under the impression, not even asking any other questions, my daughter's just going to work with my husband. And it's not openly, like she doesn't know exactly what's happening.
No, but I think it was bothering her. I think things started to bother her more and more as time went on.
Yeah.
And I also suspect that my father was under some kind of mind control. I think he was spotted in the military when they were doing all the psychological testing as a good candidate for some kind of mind control program, because he was very intelligent, but he was very, very damaged too. So from some of my memories, especially in the lab-like facilities, I remember him being there in the room while I'm being hurt by these men in white lab coats, and he just has this dazed, blank look on his face, like he's not even fully there. Because I would be trying to catch his eye for him to help me, and he couldn't, or he didn't. And I've heard too that they do things like that to further traumatize the child, so it was an incredibly powerful time, and the way I survived it, because I do remember going to my mother when I was very small and saying something to her about my father's, I think it was my father's sexual abuse. And I don't remember exactly what I said. I was very young, but I remember her response, and that was, your father would never do something like that. She wasn't able to accept like something was going on like that. Her denial was so deep. And so, yeah.
So sad. And then at the same time, you're being heinously abused, going to work with your father and going through these just horrific things. And then at the same time, you're functioning as a normal child. You're still going to school. You're still attending, any different events that you have to for your family or for school, and having to live this dual life. How did that affect you? Do you look back and see kind of like red flags or warning signs that, oh my gosh, I was
Yes,
being abused and I was showing it?
Yeah, I was definitely fractured, and I was definitely repressing all the memories of what happened with my dad when we went to work, or even his sexual abuse. But the trauma was manifesting in, I was having nightmares where I would wake up yelling or crying, and I was wetting the bed very often. As a very small child, I was with crayons. I would draw these scribble drawings that my mother said were very disturbing to her, with lots of black and purple and red. And I was doing so many of them. I guess her solution to the problem was to take away all my dark crayons, because she didn't want me doing it anymore, which is, horrible. There I was trying to get out these feelings, I think, as a child. And I also was falling a lot, and it was so bad that the neighbors came to my mother and asked, why is Mary falling so much? And I didn't realize it when I was younger, but now that I've learned more about trauma, that is a classic sign of trauma, clumsiness or falling. And let's see, what else was I doing back then? I was just crying a lot too. And my mother couldn't handle that. And so she would ridicule me for crying. And so I shut down to the extent where I remember feeling depressed very young, like in the first grade.
Did you experience abuse in school also, or was that sort of a place you could go and not have to worry about that for a little bit?
Well, yes and no. It was not. It was much, much lighter than what was going on at home. It was a Catholic. I went to public school kindergarten because the Catholic school didn't have a kindergarten. And then I went to the Catholic school for first, second, maybe a little bit of third grade. And this was in Queens, New York. And the nuns were strict, and they did paddle kids, but it was kind of a joke. It was just like, it was more like to embarrass you in front of the class, where they take a thing and paddle you for something bad. But other than that, yeah, it was a total relief to, I guess. I didn't think of it that way, but it was a respite. And it's so funny. There was one crossing guard lady. It's just amazing to me how people can make an impact.
Yes.
Because I would go to the crossing walk. I walked to school. My school was only a few blocks away from my house. And she would see me and she'd say, she goes, here comes Mary Sunshine.
Oh.
And she just was so sweet to me and give me a smile. And do you know that really affected me as a child? like she was glad to see me and she knew my name and oh God. And here I am like 50 years later, 40 years later, and I still remember her. So, you know, that's to me is like, wow, kindness can be, even the smallest kindnesses can be a big healer to a traumatized child, especially, I think. For me, it was, yeah.
It's amazing how our body and mind can compartmentalize trauma and so photographically. And at the same time, in so many survivor testimonies that I have heard that have just seen the depths of darkness that you have, there's also the same sort of photographic memory with the rare people that did show kindness and that did somehow impact the child in a positive way outside of a home where they're neglected, they're abandoned, they're abused, they feel worthless, they're, you know, in a fight or flight state all the time. And it is really amazing how just something so simple a lot of these times sticks with that child throughout their abuse in childhood. And then it's also like one of the memories that sticks with the survivor all these years later during the recovery. It's like, you know, a beam of light that came in that you couldn't forget. And I think that is like so special and it's encouraging. You know, I think we're especially with like the news and all the trauma that we experience as a society thrown at us all the time with all these horrible things that happen in our world. Yeah. There's so much division and fighting and people are being mean, you know, and we forget just like how easy it is to like make a ripple effect in somebody's life that could change their life forever just by being nice, you know. And so I love hearing that. And like, it's moving to see how it affects you all these years later, that it's still something that can make you tear up or make you emotional. And, you know, bless that woman.
Yeah, really. God. Wow. Yeah.
What a sweet story. Mary Sunshine. It's really sweet. And it's so accurate too. And so when did this start to phase out of your life? Because your mother actually, you know, she was very victimized herself and very submissive and sort of went along with this, but that wasn't the case a little bit later on in your life.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
She began empowering herself. She had nun friends. Well, she went to a priest after my dad hit her. She went to a priest and for counseling, and he told her, maybe this is your cross to bear. Like, basically, maybe you're supposed to just put up with it. And thank God she didn't accept that. She did not accept that. She went then to her nun friends that she had befriended when she was a nun, and some of them had, I think one in particular had become a psychologist. The others, and there might have been another one, but she started going for counseling to these women. And they told her, you've got to leave your husband. You've got to get out of there and you've got to get your kids away from him. Because his abuse was escalating. And he would come home and my mom started leaving him, she would take us to a hotel for the weekend. She told if he came home Friday night really drunk and violent, she'd leave and take us to a hotel for the weekend. And then that kind of evolved into us going for the summer somewhere. And that happened a couple of times. And then I think I was 8 years old when she left. We left Queens and she rented a home out in Long Island somewhere, in Port Washington, Long Island. And so she began leaving him and then coming back, and he'd make all these promises. And she was also trying to do it within the structure of the Catholic Church, she wasn't ready for a divorce. She was trying to there was such a thing as a Catholic separation, but there's no laws behind it. So my dad would basically ignore it and show up. I remember him showing up at the house she moved us to in Long Island, and he'd show up drunk and he wouldn't respect her boundaries, and she couldn't call the cops on him because technically he wasn't breaking any laws. But he did talk her back into living all together, us all living together again. He bought a big, beautiful house in a kind of exclusive neighborhood of Long Island, and I guess he talked her into moving. It was. I remember that home very well. It was beautiful, and actually, we had a big. It was like 2 acres of land around it, and a lot of trees, and the land there was actually very healing for me. I used to be a tree climber, and I would climb up because I was about between 8 and 9 at this point, and I would climb up this one tree, and I remember holding its trunk and feeling the whole tree like swaying in the wind. Oh, and that felt like pure love to me. It was. And so she was trying to make it work, but my dad, that house is where he got the most insane. He was getting more and more violent. He came home. I remember my mother was very pregnant with my youngest brother, and my father, they were fighting, and she had locked herself in the bedroom, and he took the poker from the fireplace and began smashing the lock on the door of her bedroom. And I was watching all this from the living room. Their bedroom was right off the living room, and my mom started yelling to me from inside the bedroom, "Mary, call the police, call the police." And I remember thinking to myself, is she saying that because she really wants me to call the police, or is she just trying to make Dad stop? And later on I was thinking about it, like, no 8-year-old or 9-year-old should have to make that kind of a decision. Like, I'm trying to figure out. And I think I do remember calling the police, and that was something that happened a couple of times too growing up, is that the police would show up to stop my father, from the violence in the house. So my mother finally, I guess, had enough, and she told me later she had been stealing. It wasn't technically stealing because she was a housewife, and half of everything that my father earned was hers as well as a homemaker. But she began taking money from him and putting it away, putting it aside. And I guess she had taken enough money to where she felt we could leave the country. And she did. She took all his kids, 4 of us at that time, or that's how many brothers and sisters I have. I have 3. I have a sister and 2 younger brothers. And she took us all to Ireland. We had a summer home there. My dad was he was getting really rich really fast. And he had bought a summer house in Ireland, and she took us there. And that's how I got out. Yeah, I'm not sure if he knew it was coming, but I believe the mind control scientists knew that that was a distinct possibility because my dad was falling apart. And so that's when I think they did the discharge programming for me, or discard programming. And I do have a memory of 2 doctors talking about me. I call them doctors, but they had white lab coats on. But they were discussing me in front of me, which was extremely, I think that's the only memory I ever have of hearing them discuss me in front of me like that. And one of them said to the other, "They're gonna let her go." So I think I was in this program, and because of what was happening, rather than, have me killed, they were going to let me go. But I think the way they ensured that I would never, in their minds, never be able to remember and tell, was to load me up with discard programming, which, from what I know, is basically it's programming to make you feel so bad about yourself that you don't want to live, or that you're going to treat yourself really badly and then eventually die from either dangerous lifestyle or drugs or alcohol, so yeah. And we went to Ireland, and that's when my healing began, I think. Or it was, happening in sporadic bits throughout my childhood, but Ireland is where I was able to really dive into nature for long periods of time and stuff. So
One of the things I was going to ask you was if you have memories or recollection of what types of things they were programming you for.
well, they were definitely programming me to be a sexual slave and they even used the phrase master of the ceremonies, or the masters. Yeah. And they were trying to destroy my self-esteem, and instill a sense of like false pride that I had been chosen to be of service to these men. And they wanted me to feel like it was an honor to do that. And that was really bizarre, because I swear they were able, I'm not sure how, to infuse me with false feelings. Like, I remember being pumped up with this weird sense of pride it felt foreign to me as a child. But yeah, they were using, I was in the lab-like places. I was very often strapped to a chair, and there was something on my head. It was, I believe, a kind of helmet thing with metal bands and wires, and sometimes there were wires going into the backs of my hands, and they would use electricity, I think. I mean, I remember feeling incredibly spacey and these incredibly intense pains at my temples. And then there would be pain in my wrists and ankles. I think my ankles were strapped to the chair as well. And then I'd have a lot of pain in my vagina. And it would all be so intense, I would leave my body. I'd dissociate. I called it leaving my body, floating away. And I think that's when they would do serious programming. And I remember parts of me were being trained to kill, unfortunately, which I'm so grateful I got out when I did, because I think that was just beginning, that kind of training, when I was older. But like 8 or 9, or maybe 7. And I also, there was a lot of emphasis on pleasing men, and there was even a part of me trained to act like a puppy dog, which is really bizarre. I think it was some fetish thing for these guys, because it was and parts were like, they wanted me to show gratitude for their kindness to me, and I would be licking the backs of their hands and wagging my tail, and I'm this tiny little child, naked. And yeah, the other thing that was really strange to me was that, well, a lot of the doctors who were abusing me, I believe, were Project Paperclip scientists, because they did use German words and phrases. I didn't know it was German then, but I remember them calling me Lieber, saying Lieber to me a lot, which it's some form of a term of endearment, I think, in German. And but they were purposely mixing like being affectionate with me with torturing me, and they wanted me to be programmed to believe that sexual abuse was affection, and they also wanted me to believe that pain was a form of affection. That was really deep programming they got into. And I remember being, because they had realized I was hungry for affection, it was my weakness. And they were really using that and starting to have a real effect on me as far as gaining full control, deeper levels of control in my mind. But I did have, what I think was some kind of, for want of a better word, spiritual energy show up to help me during those really, really intense, painful programming sessions. And there were a couple of times, and because I remember I was in the chair or on a table, and they were there. The doctors were there, the white lab coat guys. And then this energy showed up on this side of me. And I just remember being, as a child, very drawn to it because it was very, very compassionate, kind, and wise. And so, and all I saw it in my mind's eye, all I saw it was like, it was kind of a white light with all these sparklies. I used to call it the pink and blue dots. It was like pink and blue and maybe yellow and stuff. And it was like this energy. And it was also very wise. And it was as if it was talking to me. It was like communicating. If it was separate, it could have been my higher self or soul. I'm not sure what it was, right? But I did call it angel as a child. I called it an angel. But it was very honest with me, and they said they're lying to you. They don't care about you because they were using the affection. They said they do not care about you. They're doing this to gain control of your mind. And they said, and I remember it showed me a picture of a garbage can. And it said, they're using you, and when they're done using your body, they're going to throw your body in the garbage can. And for some reason, that was so shocking. It jolted me as a child. But it jolted me. It was kind of like it jolted me out of the way they were luring me into this mind control. And especially that image of the trash can, because I knew when I saw it that my body was in there. And so it helped me create this kind of mental wall against them, like where I wasn't there was a part of me that was always questioning, are they being real? Are they lying? And I think it saved me from them getting very deep control of me. Yeah. And that happened a couple of times in different key places. So
That's so fascinating. I've heard that a lot too. There's such a spiritual element, I think, when you are just in such darkness, despair, trauma. I think there's, a lot of supernatural things that happen to help somebody survive aside from dissociating. I think there's such a spiritual layer to all of this that has been, really stripped from our collective consciousness in a sense. We've been like really focused on this physical world that we live in. Mm-hmm. And I think survivors are helping educate us on the other layers that exist energetically and spiritually that are always around us, whether or not we're aware of it or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you me being able to talk to you about it, because I don't feel comfortable sharing about it always, but I do with you. So that's a big gift. Thank you.
Who knows how that experience of trauma would have affected you if you didn't have this other layer of spirituality and energy around you at that time.
Yeah, it really worked too, because there were other memories where I remember like there was a pedophile group I was brought to, and I was one of other small children. It was like a crowd of us, and we were all naked. I remember that. And we were kind of let loose into this very opulent, like wealthy looking, I guess I would call it a executive lounge, but it had all this wood paneling and big, beautiful fireplace, polished wood. And when I had the body memories, I could feel how soft the carpet was underneath my feet. I was running across with all these children, and we had been programmed by at that point to obey and to come to whoever wanted us to go to them. And there were all these older men in big leather chairs, these kind of overstuffed chairs. And there was a woman there, but I kind of got the impression she was there for the men as well. And it was like a very fancy executive kind of place. And one man wanted me to come over to him. And at that point, I remember this very clearly. It was as if my body was a car, a vehicle, right? And there was the awake Mary, my authentic self, but I was sitting in the back seat of the car. And there was a part of me driving that had been mind controlled. So and it was like I didn't have control over my own vehicle. This part that was driving did, and we went to the man. But I remember consciously a part of me saying, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. But I was like robotically obeying, basically. Oh. And I wanted to run. That part of me wanted to run and cry. And I couldn't. I couldn't control my own body. And that is incredible to me, that they had the ability to do things like that to children,
It's absolutely horrific. And then to think about how society doesn't understand trauma in this way, but these pedophiles and occults do, and they weaponize it and use it as their tool of secrecy and sort of override the body's natural mechanism of just survival, and they take advantage of what happens in that process to their benefit.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Mary, that is so horrific. Was your father there at that event, or how did you end up there?
I don't recall him being there, no.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Just to think about these things existing, and if they existed then, to think about what it looks like today, that these types of things are still happening today.
I know, this was in the late 60s, early 70s. So.
Oh my goodness.
That my abuse happened, yeah. Let's see. Oh, I was brought once to this incredibly large space. I think it was like an airplane hangar, where they park airplanes. Like, it was one of those structures that's really, really big. And I remember there were these balconies on the wall, against one wall of this place. And there was about 3 of them going up the side of the building. And I believe there was an elevator on the far left that went up and down to all the different elevators, but there were also ladders between the different layers or balconies, And there were cages on these balconies, and there were children in them. And that's when I knew, when that memory came back, that's when I knew this is really organized. This is highly organized. And some of the children looked very sick in those cages. And I was brought into one and held in one for a while. And men and I think a woman in white lab coats came. I remember some of them had clipboards. And it was like they were observing me and taking notes. And I think there were other things done, but so that's one memory I have of the mind control stuff. As far as ritual abuse,
I'm going to bring up some of Mary's art while we talk about the ritual abuse memories. That way you guys can follow along with how she has processed this into a visual for us.
Yeah. I was brought to rituals or places where mostly men, I remember. There were times when there were women there, where I did see children being killed in a sacrificial way. It was some kind of offering to whatever energy or entity they worshipped. And it really seemed, and I was sexually abused at some of these rituals, and I saw other children there as well at times, and it seemed like sexually abusing a child, defiling a child's innocence, was a powerful offering to these energies they worshipped. There were lots of different settings and places these rituals occurred. Some were out in the woods, some were seemed like basements or underground places. I remember seeing adults also killed. And then sometimes there was a kind of sacramental cannibalism where people were consuming the child or the adult who had been killed as a sacrifice, and blood drinking. And there were times I was forced to help hurt. Like, I'd have to hold a knife and someone would have their hand over my hand, and I would be forced to participate in the ritual. And I think my artwork says a lot, and so I think if people want to know more, they can view my art and stuff.
Yes. Yeah, I had said it in the introduction, but for people who aren't familiar with Mary's work, one of the ways that she has been expressing online is through her artwork. A lot of her posts on Instagram are her artwork with captions explaining it. She has a website that I'll show you guys in a little bit as well, where she has a gallery of her art, all different types of art. Some of it is this graphic art of her abuse, and others is very beautiful. She has some nature art, and she just sort of dives into anything that she feels passionate about. But I would definitely encourage you guys to go support her and check that out if you guys want to learn more. I think sometimes our hands can speak in ways that our mouths and words can't. And, you know, there's just a lot that can be expressed through art and visuals that sometimes words don't do justice for.
Yeah, so I think it accesses a different part of the brain. And I think I had parts who were very afraid to express things verbally, but the images kind of got around that programming, drawing and stuff.
Yes.
And all the drawings I've done are to process flashbacks I'm having. Like this isn't, it helps me get through the flashbacks, and it makes it a lot easier on me physically and mentally and emotionally. So drawing is something I do to really, heal myself, basically. Yeah.
Which is incredible. And it's amazing that survivors all over the world are realizing the power of their hands and creating something out of their pain outside of their body, and how healing that can be, and how much more healing sometimes it can be than just simply verbalizing it.
Yeah.
The different ways that emotions can spill out on paper or in a book or in a poem or in a song or woodworking. There's just so many different ways that we can be creative that I've heard from different survivors that are utilizing their hands. And, it's amazing. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And I think it's something that everybody, no matter your level of trauma, that I think there's a reason why we play as a kid and why we want to create stuff and make things and build things. I think there's part of that does naturally heal us, inside to out. And we kind of have that like taken out of our lives throughout school. It's like an elective, you go to art class to do art. You don't do art any other time. It's for class. And I think that we're sort of relearning through you and others that art is healing no matter what age you are, no matter what point of life you are, no matter your level of trauma. That art, creativity, writing, all those things, like they heal our spirit and our heart in ways that sometimes talking about it can't.
No, it's, I heard somewhere that creativity helps you think outside the box too. Like, because I would sometimes draw things subconsciously and then look at them later and be like, oh my gosh, like I remember I did a drawing in one of the military places I was brought to. And one of the soldiers in the drawing looked like a zombie to me. And I remember looking back at it like, wow, that guy looks really out of it. And I was like, wait a second, maybe he was out of it. Maybe he was mind-controlled soldier in that scenario too. So, it helped me. Sometimes I get these insights and revelations from drawing. It's weird.
Absolutely. And I also think it's an amazing way for a system to communicate. If you have nonverbal, if you have parts that maybe are at odds with other parts and have trouble communicating, seeing something on paper, reading words, it's a way that everybody can sort of get on the same page too, and integrate that memory together and have kind of a clear understanding of it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I love art. And I think even like the colors, like in that drawing you just showed, choosing those vivid colors was healing. The bright pinks and stuff like that, even though it's such a horrible scene, I was kind of healing myself as I expressed it through the color. So, yeah.
And not that you have to talk about this one, but I also want to show one of the sort of more bright and clear photos that you've drawn. And, just to see.
I'm glad you're showing it, because my therapist always tells me, Mary, after you paint your darkness, paint your resources, paint what makes you happy and you can tap into for healing. And I did that. That was one of my drawings.
I love it. It's so precious. It makes me happy to look at it. It's just like pure happiness on paper.
Yeah, it totally cracks me up every time I see it. I'm like, oh my God, did I do
It's really sweet, but it's really cool just to see like how dark your drawings can get and sort of the limited colors. It can be more blacks and reds, that color palette. And then something like this where you're sort of utilizing the entire rainbow in a sense, and it's just very joyful.
Yeah, I'm trying to I think my psyche wants to balance things out. It's like the darker you go, the brighter you gotta go with the colors, Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about your healing journey.
Yeah.
So when your mom moved and got away and went to Ireland, your abuse started to taper away. And not that you remembered everything then, but that was sort of the catalyst to you eventually being able to recall memories down the road and
Yes,
start that.
absolutely. I think
Do
it
you want
saved life. I think if I had stayed much longer in the mind control and with my father, I wouldn't have survived this long. I think I would have. God knows what would have happened, but yeah, we went to Ireland, and unfortunately, my mom was very stressed out. My father didn't want to support her. He thought he'd get her back, but she got the house. He gave her the house, but he didn't give her any kind of financial support other than that. And we ended up coming back to the United States about 2 years after being in Ireland. But I did, like I said, dive into nature. It was this 1970s, and my mom felt safe letting me just go off into the. We had a house with, and we were the last row of houses on this beautiful. It was called Brayhead. It was a kind of like a mountain. They had, and there were farmers' fields and a forest, and then other fields and rocky and a kind of. It was like a very small mountain kind of whatever. And but I'd just go off up there and just wander around for hours by myself, and just totally play and immerse myself in nature. And that was very powerful. And looking back, I realized that was so healing. And Bray is right by the ocean, so when we'd get dropped off from school, we'd walk up this road that was right by the ocean and the cliffs. And so it was this huge playground for me. And then we moved back to, my mom she told me she couldn't handle being a divorced woman in Ireland. Ireland was kind of backwards a little bit in that regard, it seemed like, and she couldn't handle it. So she went to Chicago because her sister lived there.
Oh.
And then we were there for a few years. I think my mom was working as a substitute teacher. She still had her teaching credentials from when she was a nun. And but the way she was surviving was she'd sell a house and we'd move to a smaller house. Or we'd rent for a while. And then yeah, so I moved a lot as a kid, basically. And, I wonder how much my mom knew, because my aunt, my mother's sister, said to me something about that they thought mom was paranoid. And then she just commented to me once, your mom always thought the FBI was after her. So now I'm like, wow, I wonder if my mother suspected that the military or somebody was monitoring us or something. And that's been really helpful, because I really didn't, moving for me so much as a kid was difficult, especially when I got older. And but we ended up going to San Diego because the heating bills were too high in Chicago. And so, the winters were too brutal. And so we ended up going down to San Diego and living there in different places, parts of San Diego. And I went to high school down there. And then at 18, I graduated. I had always been good at school. That's how I pleased my mom. And she was a teacher, so I guess she expected that of me. So I had good grades up until my senior year, and things started to fall apart for me. And my mother's stress and pressure of being a single mother to 4 children, it escalated her physical abuse towards me and emotional abuse. I think she made me her kind of partner in running the family. So I was really depressed, but I got out and went to New York, and gosh, we're supposed to be talking about healing, but
We're
not
getting
quite
there.
there yet. But at 18, I won a scholarship to Fordham University
Wow.
in New York, and it was just enough for 1 year, but I figured I'll go for a year and figure it out, you know. I was pretty lost at that point with all the trauma and stuff. But I did get to New York. I did go to Fordham for 1 semester, and my healing started. I met a friend in Fordham who, and we became really good friends, and he was really into art and music, and I started going with him downtown to check out. There was a thriving art scene happening. I mean, it was just starting to really blossom down on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. It was the 1980s. And the rents were cheap down there. It was kind of a ghetto, scary place, but artists could afford apartments and do their art. They didn't have to work. You know, I remember I used to work three nights a week at a nightclub, and that's all I needed to live on in New York City. Can you believe it? Yeah, I had my rent was only $300, something, $350 maybe a month for a studio, a big studio apartment. And so that being in that, and I ended up dropping out of school and just living down there with my friends that I was making, but I was dealing with a lot of emotional wounding, very, very low self-esteem, PTSD. But being around all this creative energy, my creativity was shut down at the time. But I was so drawn to these people who were just expressing themselves so freely in their dress and, you know, their makeup and then their art, and it was really popping down there. Like, it was really going off. And so,
Wow.
yeah, it was an incredible time. And that was healing to me, I realize now. But I was really going down to some dark places emotionally, with low self-esteem, still waking up screaming and yelling in the night. I would sleep a lot. I was depressed. I hated myself. I felt worthless because I was aware I was really broken as far as my ability to relate to other people. I had lost my sense of who I really was from the trauma, and I was still under partial mind control. I still believed that sex was affection, that if a guy wanted me sexually, that meant he liked me, like it was love. And it took me a while to wake up from that. But I bottomed out in New York, and I was suicidally depressed.
Mm.
And my mind was so negative, and I think that was part of the programming as well. But I hit bottom as far as I started looking for answers, like trying to make life better for myself. And I was an avid reader, and I'd hang out at bookstores. Back then, this is all before social media, no cell phones. There wasn't even ATMs back then. And so I'd go to bookstores and hang out and read stuff. And I was hanging out at this bookstore, and I started finding, it was kind of a metaphysical bookstore, and I started finding these books that were helping me, spiritual books. It was channeled information.
Wow.
And they were really speaking to me on a deep level. And so I started reading those more and really got into some of them. And they were helping me examine. They were saying, well, you know, your life is really profoundly affected by the beliefs you have about yourself. And I started looking at my beliefs, and I was like, oh my God, I just feel like a worthless piece of shit all the time. You know what I mean? Like, I believe I'm worthless and I don't deserve anything, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, it was boggling my mind, but it was the beginning of change. It was like me starting to question and change. And a few years later, I decided I really wanted to focus on healing. I knew I had started going to a 12-step a little bit, but I wasn't really ready for it. I was dropping in on meetings because someone handed me I was in a bar one day and someone handed me a flyer that listed the traits of an adult child of an alcoholic and dysfunctional family. If you can believe that, I know.
Whoa.
They came in. It was like an afternoon in the summer, and so there was a door open in the back of the bar and a door open in the front. And they came in the back, handed everyone in the bar, there was only like 7 of us or something, this flyer, and then walked out the front. I guess that was their public service or something.
And you're like, whoa.
And I read the list. I'm like, holy shit, this is me. Like all the traits of an adult child of a dysfunctional, extremely dysfunctional family. Low self-esteem, insecurity, social anxiety, fear of authority figures. And I was like, wow, I never went to the doctors. I had a deep, deep fear of the doctor. Anyone in a clinical kind of setting. So I started going to ACA meetings, Adult Children of Alcoholics. And I really related. I thought that was my problem, that my mom hit me a lot as a kid and my dad was a violent, crazy alcoholic. I had no memories of sexual abuse or ritual abuse or mind control at that time. Everything was repressed. So anyway, I realized that New York wasn't a very healing place for me. And I had friends who were from San Francisco, and they're like, come out to San Francisco. San Francisco is like New York, but nicer. There's more trees, there's more greenery. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna move out there to heal, you know? Because I had gotten into drugs in New York, and that really almost brought me down. But I got out. I pulled out, and but anyway, so I ended up going to San Francisco and having a baby. And she kind of was a surprise. But she's like the best surprise I've ever had in my life, basically. And I was going to 12-step when I got pregnant, and I really asked the universe, that was my higher power at the time, you know, do I keep this baby? I didn't think I could, to be honest. And I got a yes, it's going to be good for you. And then I was, reading all these books that were healing me and saying, I could create the reality I wanted. I can create a beautiful life for myself. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And yeah. And so, and I was living on disability at the time. I'd just gotten disability. So it wasn't, from a logical point of view, it wasn't a very smart decision. But I was going from my gut and my heart. Like, I asked for signs. It took me a while to make the decision. So I became a mom and was using these spiritual tools I was learning in these books and going to meetings. But I stopped going to meetings when my daughter was born. And so that was real. I realize now that was a mistake I made, because I thought I could do it on my own, and I didn't. I was actually scared of all the intimacy going on at meetings, because people are really telling it like it is, I couldn't handle it. So I thought, I got this. I can do it on my own. And her dad was in the picture. We didn't live together because I figured out he had anger issues, and I didn't want to be fighting with him. That was too much like my parents, so we lived separately in San Francisco, but he was present. He came and would help me with lots of things. He helped me get everything I, needed as a mom. And then later when my daughter was older, she would go to his house for the weekends. And, so he was very much a part of her growing up. And I'm very grateful for that. Because I don't think I could have done it. I was naive. I didn't think I could have done it on my own, But anyway, when she was about 5, my daughter, I started raging at her. She would trigger me. And I didn't know it at the time. But I would lose control and I'd start yelling and banging things in the house, and it was frightening her. And I felt out of control. And it horrified me because I saw my mom in me and all the violence in my childhood. And so I tried to stop over and over, and I would stop. I wouldn't do it for 2 weeks, and then I'd be triggered again, something would happen again. And I was horrified and suicidal about it. I was having thoughts of suicide because I was convinced I could do it differently than my parents. But thank God I hit bottom and I reached out to a therapist, and her dad paid, my daughter's dad paid for the therapist.
Oh.
Yeah. And there was a lot of love between us, And I went to that therapist, and I was so scared. And after the 3rd or 4th time we met, she said, "You are a classic adult child of a dysfunctional family." She goes, "And I believe we've been brought together for me to tell you that you have to start going to meetings if you're going to heal." She goes, "You're isolating." And that's what adult children of alcoholics do. They isolate from the world because of all the terror they experienced when they were young. The world just isn't a safe place anymore. And I didn't want to hear that. I thought I was too smart for a 12-step. But I was desperate enough to know that I was desperate enough to be willing to try. And so I started going to meetings. She said, she goes, "Try at least 7 different meetings. Go to any meeting you feel drawn to." Because there's all different kinds. There's Codependence Anonymous, And she goes, "Try at least 7 before you give up on it." And that was very good advice, because I didn't like the first few ones I went to. But around the 4th one, it was a Codependence Anonymous meeting, and I was blown away. There was a man there talking about confronting his sexual abuser at the meeting and weeping. And when I saw that, something in me knew I can share about anything here. It was almost like some deep part of me knew, and I started going to that meeting regularly, and I went to an ACA meeting in my neighborhood. And so I went to those 2 meetings for about 7 years. Yeah, and I started slowly to heal. I was still experiencing a lot of pain, and I was still being triggered by my daughter, and by life. These big, deep emotions, intense emotions. But something about my therapist was right, something about not isolating and connecting with other human beings and hearing them be honest. And slowly I became willing. I got over my fear of being honest about my feelings and my thoughts. And then a few years into that recovery, I found a book it's called Life, Paint, and Passion. Awakening, what is it called? Oh, it's Life, Paint, and Passion. It's something about awakening spontaneous expression. And because there was a local bookstore I like to hang out, and it was there on the table, and I was drawn to the cover, and I started reading it, and I was like, and it was all about how you don't have to be trained to be an artist. All you have to be doing is willing to put down what it is that you want to put down in any way you can and not judge it. That was the key. Don't judge it. Just do it for you, to this process of being creative. And the key, they said, was to let whatever wanted to come out and not judge it. Whatever images, whatever, you don't have to have a plan. You just start in one corner and keep going and see what happens. You know what I mean? And I love that. And so I started experimenting with it. And I still didn't have any memories then, but I started drawing, and it was a game changer for me. I'd been journaling and, doing guided meditations, but something about the drawing, I just would get so peaceful and so focused. And then, so I started drawing and reading the book and doing my best to incorporate their ideas. It was kind of hard at times. My inner critic was really strong, but I just figured out how to kind of like ignore her after a while as best I could, And I would tell myself, this is just for me, and I can tear it up afterwards, and no one has to see it, And so I'm drawing, I'm feeling good, and I'm loving that flow, that peace, quiet mind. And my daughter's dad's an artist, and so he's totally supportive. And then all of a sudden I want to start drawing swastikas. I was like, whoa, what's this about? And all these images, and if you might be able to show a picture I think it's the first and second one.
Okay.
Where I would it was just me, this was after I had been drawing for a while, but I would just draw whatever wanted to come out. And these things started coming out of me that were kind of disturbing to me. I was a young mom. I didn't want to be a mom who paints swastikas. You know what I mean? It's like, that doesn't sound cool to me when you're hanging out with other moms, It's like, yeah, I'd do it as a design, I'd be drawing. All of a sudden I'd be like, okay, something wants to go in the middle. And it's like, evil. I remember thinking and I'd be looking at it going, out of all the words I could choose, why do I want to choose the word evil?
Especially since the painting, like the overall, it's like colorful, it's kind of happy feeling,
I know, but I think what I know now is that my subconscious was giving me clues.
Yes.
There's something really dark. And I didn't know how to interpret it. I tried to stop, especially the swastikas really freaked me out. So I tried to stop drawing them. I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. And what happened was all my creativity shut down. Because I wasn't honoring what wanted to come out. This one is really freaky to me because see the lightning bolts in the heart, in the yellow heart? Those are lightning bolts. And now I look back, and the Project Paperclip scientists, their insignia is the SS, and it looks like lightning bolts.
Yes.
Because some of these scientists, they'd wear Nazi stuff, like a pin or a armband, or I'd see a banner on the wall. So I was being exposed to these Nazi symbols in the mind control places and other places. And it's funny, all the swastikas are backwards.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and I don't know, I still don't know what that is. Maybe I was trying to, heal from it. So that was my way of flipping it. I don't know. I was totally unconscious. I was like, why am I painting this? But this is what I want to paint. And what I finally said was, oh, it must be, it's just symbolic of darkness in the world. You know what I mean? There's darkness in the world, and so But I did not show my work to very many people, a couple of friends, and then later more friends, and they were actually very open-minded and intelligent. You know, they were like, it's no big deal, Mary. You know, or whatever. But man, that's what got the ball rolling, was me allowing myself to put out there what wanted to come out.
Wow.
And I would sometimes cry and cry and cry. It was releasing. And let's see, so fast forward then, when years went by, and I was progressing in recovery, but I felt like there was still something really dark and heavy. I wasn't healing as fast as I thought I should be. It seemed like other people were getting more recovery than me, and I was still dealing with some things, and having feelings of depression, low self-esteem, still really, really dark depression at time, deep. And I had been drinking, because those programs, they say, you know, if you think you have a problem, get help, but you don't have to not drink to be in Codependence Anonymous or ACA. And I didn't think I had a problem at first. But what happened was life got stressful and my drinking started to escalate. And I was going into denial about it. And eventually what happened was I was starting to drop in on AA meetings, but I didn't want to commit to it. I was afraid to let go of the drinking. It had been such a comfort to me my whole life. And but what happened was we ended up moving, and when I had my baby, it was the first time I went to the doctors in years. Because I knew, I was like, I have to make sure I'm okay, because I'm pregnant with, you know. So I had a doctor, and I had an aunt. I had an aunt. I was having health issues and I didn't want to go back to the doctor. And I had an aunt who had cancer. And she made me promise her I would go to the doctor and check out what was wrong with my health. I was very fatigued. And because I loved her, and she was like dying of cancer, basically, I said, okay, I'll go. And I did a checkup, and then the doctor called me one day and said, you have to stop drinking right now. My liver was badly damaged. And I believe that was from drugs and stuff I was being given very young. And also the trauma. I had to repress so much anger and grief as a child. And I heard in Chinese medicine, the liver is the seat of anger in the body. So if you're repressing anger, you have a potential of weakening your liver. So anyway, I had to stop. I decided to stop. I wasn't sure I wanted to. I thought I would just die. I was like, I've had a long life. It was my late 40s. Mm-hmm. But luckily, my daughter was 18 or 17. And luckily, there was a nurse in one of my 12-step meetings who worked on a liver ward. And every now and then she would describe, when she had a rough day at work, she would describe about how horrible it was to die of liver disease. And so I knew I couldn't do that to my daughter. I couldn't put her through that. She was just at the age of where she's leaving high school and going to college. I knew if I was like, no way. So I went into AA. And I eventually stopped drinking. And do you know, 2 years into sobriety, that's when the RAMC memories started coming back, flooding back. alcohol was keeping everything down. That's why I didn't want to give it up. I was scared. And so I finally was clear and clean and working a strong program. And I started having panic attacks and then being flooded with these memories. It just blew me away. But I had my journaling. I had a lot of support. I'd gotten a therapist for my father's incest memories. I was seeing a therapist for that. And so I trusted her and I started telling her about the ritual abuse stuff. And I had also been in a program, an inner city program for survivors of sexual trafficking and abuse. And that program was absolutely amazing. It was started by a prostitute who wanted to get off the street. And it was so hard for her to get off the streets and into a career that she decided to start a nonprofit to help other prostitutes and women who were trafficked transition. And everyone who worked at the program was a survivor. They had all been actively, some of them for years, working as prostitutes or in a trafficking capacity, being trafficked as kids. And now they were the counselors and the people running the meeting. And I could say anything there. You couldn't put anything past these women. Do you know what I mean? They were tough.
They knew.
They knew. But it was incredibly liberating too.
Wow.
And they gave a lot of holistic therapy there. A lot of acupuncture, Reiki, yoga, acupressure, group counseling, individual counseling.
Wow.
Yeah, and I had to go 3 times a week for 2 hours a day minimum. I could go more if I wanted. And I got tons of acupuncture. I really bonded with the acupuncturist. She's a very natural, loving woman, very healing woman. She would give me full body acupuncture layouts. Yeah, multiple. My therapist was Chinese, and she said, I'm jealous. You're getting all this free acupuncture. And I want to say a word for that therapist, because when I first started remembering the ritual abuse and the mind control, I knew nothing about government mind control or ritual abuse. I was terrified. I felt like I lived in a horror movie some days. Everything looked ominous and dark because I was dealing with these horrible memories, and I managed to tell her a little bit. Like and I remember crying in her office saying, I think I'm losing my mind. And she said to me, she goes, Mary, I've been working with you for 6 years. You are not losing your mind. I would know if you were. She said, you've been a responsible mother. You've been in recovery. She said, the psyche is very protective of itself, and it will only release information when it knows you're strong enough and have enough support to handle it. And she says, your psyche is releasing these memories because it knows you're able to handle it now. And I did. I had a lot of support. I was going to that program, going to meetings. I had the therapist, so. And that's how the ball really got rolling for me. And, I moved and things like that, but I always was able to find a therapist. And even if they didn't out of desperation, really, just because I needed to talk to someone. But I would ask my higher power, please send me someone who can handle this stuff, you know? And the next therapist I had, because I moved, I had to leave that one I loved so much because I moved. And the next therapist I had, he didn't know anything about, he was gay. I told him, I want a gay, I don't want a straight man. And it was San Francisco, so it's like, okay. Like, they don't get offended when you ask for a gay therapist, whatever. This is Medi-Cal. I'm like, I wanted to be 100% gay, like super gay. And it was so funny. The first day he was taking notes, and he had this pen, and taped to the back of the pen was this long plastic rose. Like, I was like, okay, all right, I'm safe. This guy. But
Oh,
it turns out he was from South America. He's from Mexico, but he moved to San Francisco when he was very young, 3 or something. But he studied political torture in school, South American political torture. And when I started telling him about the mind control stuff, I finally trusted him enough. It took a while. He said, nothing you are telling me isn't something I haven't heard before in the context of political torture. So he wasn't familiar with government mind control, but he totally validated my experience by saying that,
wow.
I know, it was incredible. In fact, it was just validating in a way that I had never experienced before, because it's like, put it in a bigger context. Like, wow, people in South America were doing this, and it was happening to me in New York. So that was incredibly validating. And then also, because of his Mexican background, the ritual abuse wasn't that far out to him either. That's what he told me, some stories of like spiritual phenomenon stuff that he witnessed as a kid it was more positive, but I don't know, I think it's too because of the Mexican culture with the Aztecs and the human sacrifices, the Incas. Anyway, so I've been blessed with finding these people who don't necessarily know everything there is to know about ritual abuse and mind control, but they're open-minded and they're compassionate, and they'll have some thing in their experience that is able to hold what I'm telling them. They're not phased. In fact, I remember I said to this therapist, I was terrified, and it was programming that was still breaking down. If I told him anything, he would throw me in a mental institution. I was convinced, so that's what I didn't tell people. And I finally said, the way I got out of it was, I'm afraid. I have a fear. And he goes, do you want to tell me what you're afraid of? And I said, if I tell you what I'm remembering, you're going to put me in a mental institution. And he laughed, and he goes, it's funny. He goes, my job used to be going into mental institutions and getting out people who didn't belong there. That had been his job before he was there, while he was in the training to be a therapist.
Oh my gosh.
I know. So I was like, and he goes, I'm not going to throw you in a mental institution.
He's like, you're one I would pull out.
Therapist is going to put you in a mental institution. So anyway, wow, this is really, I hope this isn't too long.
No, not at all. I hope it's not too long for you. This has been and is so valuable to hear all of this and all these different aspects of your story. And what's most amazing is, like, always in your time of need, in some bizarre way, you had so many divine interventions, whether it was the flyer somebody handed you or this therapist validating political torture, all these little pieces of your story guiding you where it almost didn't make sense that these things would come up or happen. They're not like,
I think I was doing my best to connect with a higher power and, act ask for what I wanted and visualize what I wanted, and using all the tools I was learning. And I do want to touch
Amazing.
on one other thing, though, that was incredibly healing during that
Please,
time.
yes.
I was really new in oh no, I had been in 12 AA for 2 years, and then the memory started, but it was only a few months after the memory started that I was having really intense panic attacks, and out of desperation, because I was still so afraid to share what I was remembering, seeing in these flashbacks. I went to a women's meeting and I shared very vaguely one day, like I was like, I'm having memories of my father and his associates abusing me, and that's all I said. And they're coming back, really powerfully. I don't even think I had a word for flashbacks yet. And a woman came up to me after the meeting and said, I'm really glad you're sharing about what you're sharing. And she goes, I'm an incest survivor. And then she says, and I'm also a ritual abuse survivor. I literally almost fell off my chair, and I was like, excuse me? I couldn't, like, it was like I couldn't take it in.
Yeah.
I thought I had made up that word, ritual abuse, because I was trying to, in my mind, describe what I was seeing and stuff. It's some kind of ritual, it's abuse, horrible abuse. So she says it, and she ended up sitting down. I think I burst into tears, and she ended up sitting down next to me, and we started talking, and that was my friend Nikki. She became my sponsor in AA. And Nikki was, that's not her real name. I'm changing her name for her anonymity. And this is another, they call it God shot in AA, God shot. But she had been healing from ritual abuse for 20 years. She had been in therapy for 20 years at that point. And she was also on, I found out later, not that day, she was on the board of directors for survivorship, which was, at that time, it was the West Coast survivorship, and they had in-person conferences every year for ritual abuse and mind control survivors. She became my sponsor, and she helped me tremendously. She wouldn't give me any information unless I asked for it. She didn't want to plant anything in me that I wasn't already coming up with myself. But she said, I'll answer any question you have. And we started to work together, but it was very challenging for me at the beginning. I thought maybe both of us are insane. I remember thinking that, like, maybe we're both crazy, It was so scary. And but gradually I began to trust her and tell her slowly, and she truly was an angel in my life. And because she knew what I was going through, and we had a stay safe contract where we agreed I could call her anytime, day or night, if I felt suicidal. I was dealing with suicide programming because my memories are coming back. And I took her up on that. I called her, I think once, it was 1 or 2 in the morning, and she picked up the phone, talked me down.
Oh
Yeah,
my gosh.
I know. And she would do practical things, like she helped me. I didn't have a car, so I was walking a long way from the grocery store, and she goes, let's do all your heavy shopping once a month. And she'd drive me. And I'd get all the heavy cans, food and stuff, and she'd drive me home. And it like lightened my whole load for the whole month,
Oh my gosh.
I know. She helped me move when I had to move, but she was also there And gradually I started telling her what I was remembering, even though it was frightening. And so that's between that and the art and the journaling and 12-step and therapy. The program I was in that was helping me was, it was 6 months long, but they gave it to me again. They're like, you need this. And so
You
I
could
got
do a year, Barry.
twice. They did. They were like, so I got to go there for a year, and that was yoga. I think I really was attracted to yoga, and I really think that started unlocking memories from my body. I remember I was really into these spinal twists we used to do. They just felt so good. And later I found out that a lot of memories are held in the spine. So, it's like I was unlocking with all these healing things, unlocking things from my body. Yeah.
And that goes back to, again, energy. Emotions are energy. And one of the things that I did years ago, I was a fascial stretch therapist. So I worked with the fascial tissue of the body, which is not really studied in clinical or medical settings, but it's...
What is the fascial tissue?
So, not to be super graphic about it, but it's a material that coats our organs in our body. And typically in, say, cadaver labs or spaces where they've studied anatomy, it's peeled off and discarded. So it's been looked at as sort of like this part of the body that shouldn't be included in anatomy, but the covering is actually there because it's sort of like this smart network of,
wow.
It's like a cellular network that's combined over all of our organs and our cells and our bones and everywhere. And it's like where memory, emotion, and like the energetic parts of trauma flow through our body, and it attaches and it goes over organs. And so twisting and moving your body too helps the fascia push out the stiffness that can happen from stress. Whenever we're stressed, we tend to be in like these closed up sort of like isolating and closed off positions, where whenever you start healing, you open, which can be very vulnerable. But whenever you sort of like fix a lot of that, it releases emotion. And there's a book called Molecules of Emotion that explains that also, exactly what you're saying, that like different traumas like store in your body, and movement, whether it's something like yoga or massage, acupuncture, can help you release those things that have just been stuck in there for so long. And so I think that's amazing that like intuitively you were feeling that. And like
even dancing, I heard, can release.
Absolutely, yes.
Mm-hmm.
That is so incredible. And that makes me like so joyful for you that, again, like you kept having these little interventions that led you exactly where you needed to be in that moment of your life.
And it's nice to remember it. It's nice to recall it,
Absolutely. And I know we have been talking for a while. One thing I did want to give you just an opportunity to talk about, and I think it'd be really amazing to actually have you back on sometime to talk maybe more deeply about memory recall and healing and some of these things that you've learned, and then maybe dive into more of your artwork we could bring up and talk about some of those things. But you were somebody that decided to share, not just with people close around you, like this angel of a friend that you had that became your sponsor, but at some point you were like, I'm going to go public, I'm going to go online, and I'm going to start sharing with others, people I don't even know online. I'm going to share.
That was years later. Yeah, that was years later. But yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit about that, and then talk about your social media and your website? And because I want people to support you and follow you. But I think it's amazing that you made that decision to do it to begin with.
Oh, thank you. I think it was from, I've been helped so much by people who are willing to be vulnerable and honest about what they're going through, even if it's not ritual abuse and mind control, that's what 12-step is all about. People can really share honestly. Not everyone chooses to, but people do to grow and heal. And so that is very precious to me. And then I was just, it was at the point where I had made a zine. I had made a paper zine. I have one here. I don't know if I can show you. It's like made of paper from a Xerox machine in the library. And I was really into the punk scene, and that's very punk rock,
That's so cool.
If you don't see it out there, put it out there yourself. That's yourself. And because I really related to the street kids. I live near Haight Street in San Francisco, and there's a lot of street kids. So I thought, oh, it'll be like, and I had to overcome a lot of fear to do this. I'll put it out for the kids, on the street kids, because I was kind of a street punk for a while. And so I knew that a lot of these kids were probably running away from home, running away from really bad situations, So I thought, well, let's educate people about ritual abuse. And then after I did that, it was just such an empowering thing for me to do, because I had to overcome all the fear programming. Don't talk, don't tell, you'll die if you tell, all that kind of crap. And I put that out, and then I thought, and then all of a sudden I found out about Instagram, and I was like, wow, do I think I could do this on an even bigger level? And gradually, I learned how to do it. I came to, I'm not a computer baby, it's like I was learning this in my late 40s or my 50s or something.
Amazing.
But I figured out how to do Instagram. Actually, I had a phone that could actually get Instagram. Yeah. And so I gradually learned how to photograph and upload stuff, and each time I do it, it's gotten a lot easier. But in the beginning, each time I really had to overcome fear and stuff, But it's so empowering. It's gradually freed me to, express myself more freely, so.
And what's been the general response? Because I think a lot of people are scared if they've gone through something like you have. It can be such a deep-rooted fear of, again, the limited beliefs of nobody's going to believe me, or I'm going to be called worthless. It's like all those things creep up. But I'd love to hear what the actual response was of you going online.
Oh my God, by far it's positive, like 90. I think I had one guy once. This has been for years. I think I've been doing it for 5 years now, or 6 years.
Wow.
And so many people have thanked me and said it validated their experiences, and just appreciating me. And it's that part of it has been incredibly healing too, because the programming wants to think, oh, people are going to think you're a pervert or a weirdo, and it's like complete opposite, people just thanking me for having the courage to express that. And so it's very much a win-win situation. I heal from it,
And I think one of the things that's also encouraging, even though you're here showing your face and your identity, on your profile, you've shown how it's possible to do something without exposing your identity.
Yes.
If you're not maybe safe enough to, which I think is also really cool, because you're showing a way that somebody could express while also being safe.
Yes.
If they're in a position of, having to worry about that.
Oh, totally. That was part of that made it possible for me. It was like, oh, I can be anonymous,
Absolutely. And from your profile, you have a website. Do you want to just talk about that for a second too?
That came later. And I don't know what it was that wanted me to start it. I can't remember now. I just think I like the idea of having a website. I thought it was cool.
It is.
And also, I love the idea of being this like a lighthouse in the dark, if someone's feeling they're scared and they're searching, and they might come upon something like this. It was kind of like what I wish I could have found when I was earlier in my journey, because I remember how horrifying and scary it was and stuff. And so if I could have, it would be, that's what helped me, was finding like a video. I think I found Kathy O'Brien's videos on YouTube. And I was like, okay, let's just put it out there, put my story out there and put it, and let it be. And it was, again, empowering me to do it. And I had to let go of a lot of fear. And yeah.
Oh,
that's me as a kid. Yeah.
look at you. How precious. Oh my goodness.
Oh my God.
Man, it's amazing. You and other survivors, the things that you guys are doing and have done despite what you went through just blows my mind. I know people my age and older who are like, man, I wish I could do art, or I wish I could write a book, and they have every excuse in the world not to, despite not having the trauma, holding them back in any way, and I think it's amazing that despite everything that you went through, you're still willing to not only share these vulnerable parts of your life, but create things to help other people see a light in their own darkness.
Yeah. No. Yeah. It's thank you.
And on your website, you have a resources page. People can donate to you on here. You have your email at the bottom. On Instagram, you also have DMs if people wanted to connect with you there. Yes. Are those probably the best ways that people can interact directly with you?
Yeah, there's a really nice email on the website. And so you can message me on that and it'll be sent to my email box, but it's kind of like a privacy thing where you just send it to the website, basically. Yeah, there's lots of videos. I list a lot of videos that have helped me. So
this is amazing. What an incredible resources page. You even have links, you have books. I would encourage anybody, whether you're a therapist or an advocate, a survivor, a researcher, she's got a whole library here for you in videos and books and websites for you guys to go through and learn more about these topics if you're interested. Thank you for putting this together.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, really. Yeah.
Amazing, Mary. Oh my goodness. And her Instagram, if you're listening and not watching, or maybe you're watching but not actually looking at the screen, if you're driving or doing something, her Instagram is Sparrow Dose. So I will have that in the show notes below. And I'm also going to have her website, which is Sparrow foreverfree.com. So I'm going to have that also in the notes. If you guys follow her on Instagram or go on her website, you can exchange websites on her Instagram. It shows her actual website. You can click it from there. And then on her website, you guys can find her social media on there also. Mary, just thank you so much. Thank you for coming on and spending all this extra time. It's a treat.
It's been an incredible conversation. And thank you so much, Emma. You're so open. And I don't think I've ever felt more safe with an interviewer. And the way that list, I don't know if people know, but you have a testimony guide with your questions that you just like to ask. That really helped me look more into my parents' childhood, and that has been a gift of healing to me. So that list is really thoughtful and beautiful of you to do. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm really happy to hear that. It's been really helpful for me, and it's interesting looking at that and considering that those are like the commonalities between these testimonies. There's so many ways that all of your experiences are different, but there's so many common threads too, which is actually extremely validating. Like I said, just taking in that you're here, listening to these horrific things that you went through, seeing this art that you've showed us and, that you have on your social media and on your website of just these just horrific things, that I doubt words could even express properly, with some of this art, and thinking about you overcoming that, and that we get to we get to rejoice in you being here today, you know, and to see you smiling and see you getting emotional over the happiness in your life, you know, it's just really beautiful. And I'm really grateful that you did decide to go public. We have so much to learn from you. And just thank you for letting us, you know, see life through your lens, and for lending us your compassion and love throughout all this darkness, and for spending all this time with us today. It's been an absolute honor having you on, Mary.
Oh, thank you, Emma. I just want to give you a big hug. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you too. And the work you're doing is phenomenal. My God. I really do see a grant in your future for millions of dollars someday, and you can quit your job and do what you want.
Oh man, that would be so wonderful. I would love that. And I hope all survivors, you know, none of you have been, there's no payment that could possibly make up for what you survived. But it's just really sad that there's not enough support. You know, veterans get help to survive during the month. And I pray that one day we can offer that same support to survivors of these things, you know, children that enter a war that they never enlisted for. You know, you guys deserve the absolute world. And I pray that you get your memoir up. I think having your story in writing would be incredible. So I'm really looking forward to that and happy you're manifesting it.
Yes.
And was there anything that you wanted to share before we wrap up?
Just if you're a survivor and you're going through a hard time, please be kind and gentle to yourself. That's what saved me a lot of times, was learning to be kind and gentle, and that whatever it is, whatever darkness place you're in, it will pass. And, you know, I learned not to believe the lies my programming told me, and that things do change, things do pass if I just wait long enough, you know. So, yeah, I guess that's it. Thank you.
That was a beautiful thought to close with. And for everybody listening, like I said, I'm going to have Mary's information in the show notes for you guys. Please go support her. I would love if you guys went and shared her website also and dug through her resources. Follow her on social media. Sometimes, unfortunately, these topics get a little bit suppressed and censored. So having interactions of comments and shares and likes can be really helpful for creators online to help their artwork or their message be seen. So please go connect with Mary. Have all of her information in the show notes. You guys, we could not do this without you. Thank you for all your support. Bless you all. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.